Good morning. As I open, I want to leave you with a quick reminder that this webinar will be recorded and shared on our YouTube channel and website. Our main speaker will hold a Q&A session after her presentation, and you can submit your questions via the questions section of the GoToWebinar window at any time. So without further ado, we will begin recording. And thank you all for joining today. Our speaker is Dr. Geraldine Canny. She holds a PhD in immunology from University College Dublin and has a background in academic research. She is the head of the Irish Marie Skłodowska-Curie office, which is jointly operated by the Irish Universities Association and the Irish Research Council. In that capacity, we are lucky to have her here today to present information on the MSCA individual fellowships and to take your questions at the end of her presentation. I'd also like to briefly introduce myself. My name is Jackson Howard, and I am the regional representative for EURAXESS North America. EURAXESS is a European Commission initiative to deliver information and support services to researchers in order to foster researcher mobility and career development. The North America office is based in Washington, D.C., and we cover the United States and Canada, though EURAXESS services are open to all researchers of all nationalities in every field. So we welcome those tuning in from all over the world. I know that as of about half an hour ago, when I was checking the registrants, we had individuals from 6 continents, so it's great to connect with you all over the world and across many different time zones. Thank you for being with us. So to briefly, again, speak about EURAXESS and EURAXESS North America, one of the main features of this service is the EURAXESS job portal, which features research and funding opportunities throughout Europe. It's updated live and constantly, so please do visit our website as a one-stop shop for funding opportunities in all the different European countries. These offers are constantly being updated on a daily basis, and as of this morning, there are over 7,500 active ones. I will briefly share my screen with you to show you what is most relevant for you today. That is the EURAXESS website. Relevant in the sense of being able to find hosting institutions. So on the main EURAXESS website, you'll see the first section or tab here is the jobs and funding area. I mentioned the job section. You'll see here, I had highlighted about 7,500 opportunities. You can filter in information. So you put in your own field, the country you want to go to if you have that information in mind. And with that, it'll filter down those 7,500 offers to specifically what you're interested in. The same thing goes for funding opportunities if you already have a project in mind. And then in particular, I think what might be useful in supplementing your Marie Skłodowska-Curie Actions individual fellowship application is the Find Hosting section. As of right now, you see well over 200. Again, country and university or research institution specific with the area they're looking for applicants in. And you'll see that many of these, just like this one I'm highlighting, are specifically looking for MSCA individual fellowship applicants. So they're familiar with the application process, the funding scheme, and they'll be a part of that application process with you. And I'd like to finally ask a couple questions to get a better sense of our audience today. So I'm going to put up a few poll questions. Please do let us know your answers. This poll is going to be for the attendees, and we'll be able to discuss the results very briefly before the presenter discusses Marie Skłodowska-Curie Actions. So please go ahead and let us know if you've heard of MSCA Actions or not. I'll take a second to give everyone more time to do this. I'll briefly just mention that again, EURAXESS North America, all of the services we offer are free, membership is free. So when we send you a link to our website later, please do sign up to get free emails. We send emails twice a month with funding opportunities, research opportunities, news and events. Now, most of these events are virtual, so we'd really like to be in touch with you. So with that next question, I'll be closing this poll in just a moment. Almost everyone's gone ahead and responded. Okay, and then next, I'd just like to know where you're currently based. So again, regardless of your nationality or where you're from, if you're currently a researcher at a university, are you in the US, Canada, within Europe, or somewhere else? The answer really won't matter in the sense of your Marie Skłodowska-Curie Actions application. Again, it's open to all nationalities and all fields, more for the sense of just us understanding our audience, our attendees, and so that our presenter can have a good idea of maybe what to emphasize her talk on. So thank you for voting. I'll give you just a few more moments. All right, that's most of you. I'll close this out in a moment and get to our last question. And finally, you'll learn more about the different types of the individual fellowships. One that lets you carry out your research in Europe, another lets you carry your research outside of Europe. There's different timeframes and different requirements and logistics to that, but just to have an idea of, are most people hoping to move to Europe or within Europe, or do research outside of Europe? Again, this really won't have an effect on the application, but just to have an idea on our presentation today. So I'll close out momentarily. And as I do so, I'd again like to thank Dr. Geraldine Canny for being a part of this today. Please do use the questions feature of the GoToWebinar window and software to ask your questions. It'll be collecting questions throughout the entire presentation. However, she may preemptively answer some of your questions. So if you want to wait till towards the end, she'll be able to read through those and answer the ones that haven't been addressed. Okay, so with that, thank you so much, Geraldine. I appreciate you being here. I'll take one moment just to take myself off video here and give you the floor. So I'm making you the presenter. And I'll take myself off. If you have any questions about getting set up, I just want to make sure you're able to share your screen without any issues.
Great, thank you so much, Jackson, for the introduction. I hope everyone can see my screen. Can you, Jackson?
Yes, I see your screen, full screen, it looks great.
Great, thank you so much. Hello everyone, good morning if you're based in the US, good afternoon if you're based in Europe. My name's Geraldine Canny. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak today. And as Jackson mentioned, I'm based in Dublin, Ireland, and I'm National Delegate and National Contact Point for Marie Curie Actions in Ireland. So my office is sponsored and operated in partnership with the Irish Research Council, and my activities here are threefold. Firstly, to promote the MSCA programmes. Secondly, to support researchers in preparing high quality funding applications. And thirdly, in my capacity as National Delegate, to contribute to policy initiatives relevant to the actions. And that's also being done now for Horizon Europe, the successor to Horizon 2020, which, as you know, will commence next year. Ireland does well in Marie Skłodowska-Curie actions, and indeed it's the highest area of drawdown for this country under Horizon 2020, the current European funding framework programme, with the drawdown of just under 163 million euros to date since 2014, and we're ranked second as a country in drawdown per capita. To remind you of an important aspect of Marie Curie, there are two sectors. So when we talk about intersectoral activity or transfer of knowledge, we're referring to the academic sector, which comprises higher education institutions, universities, technological universities and other RPOs, and the non-academic sector, which comprises industry, so MNCs and SMEs, but also CSOs, charities, regulatory authorities and government departments. So it's quite broad. And also this is done because it's realised that many PhD holders will not end up as full professors in academia. So there are ample other employment opportunities. Participation by the non-academic sector is a necessary part of Marie S. Curie actions. And in terms of individual fellowships, this can be carried out by doing a secondment, where you would carry out a maximum of 6 months, or maybe 3 months, but a maximum of 6 months during your fellowship in a partner organisation in Europe, in order to receive hands-on training in research and other skills. This can also be carried out by performing short visits, whereby you would make spontaneous trips outside your main organisation or beneficiary with the purpose of data collection, shadowing and training workshops. And obviously this is over the course of days, so it's much shorter than a secondment. Co-supervision is a necessary aspect of this. Certainly, if you do a secondment, you will need an additional supervisor or co-supervisor in the secondment organisation. And you could also spend time in an entity with capital or legal link to the beneficiary, for example, in the spin-off company, which is still linked to a university. However, this will not be considered a secondment. So individual fellowships, as you may know, are prestigious research and training fellowships which fully fund experienced researchers for up to 3 years to carry out a research and training project. These are non-thematically driven in that as long as your research falls into one of the 8 panels or areas that I'll show later in the presentation, you may apply. As such, it's bottom up as opposed to top down. Part-time fellowships can also be requested by experienced researchers, except during the outgoing phase of the global fellowships. And I'll talk about that later. But in terms of writing the fellowship itself, you write it as if you're applying full-time. And if you're successful, you request to work at a part-time basis at a minimum activity of 50% to the project officer at RIA. That's done post-award. Clearly, these fellowships are highly prestigious and competitive. They're a great stepping stone in your career, regardless of whether you go into academia or industry. But certainly for those more viewing an academic parcours, it's well known that MSCA individual fellowship awardees have a higher success rate in subsequent European Research Council applications. And as you may or may know, ERC grants are grants that can be work that can be carried out on an individual basis, whereby it funds a researcher to also to build up their team in any area of research around the world. And this is worth noting. In Ireland, we have several examples of individuals who won a Marie Curie Fellowship and subsequently went on to win an ERC grant. So not only is it prestigious, but it's clearly a pathway. There are also benefits for supervisors, of course, and you may be a supervisor today or you may be a fellow, but if you're a fellow and you want to sell this opportunity, so to speak, to a supervisor where you'd like to go and apply, you can mention to them the following benefits that apply. It's an opportunity to build their team. It's an opportunity to attract a well-rounded researcher with complementary skills to bring new skills into their team and increase the number of publications and outputs. Their training and leadership track record can be improved and their network extended, as you will also bring in your worldwide network. If you bring in very different skills in another scientific domain, this will also allow them to increase the interdisciplinarity of their research activity. If you're a supervisor today and you wish to identify a researcher, you will want to activate your research network as soon as possible in order to identify an individual. And here, in any case, the applicant or researcher must be excellent for their career stage. The MSCA funding model is shown in this table. It's broken down into researcher costs per month and institutional costs per month. This is also explained in the guide for applicants. And the budget is automatically calculated when you enter the person months and the country on the portal. Please note that these rates are inclusive of employers' costs, which would be employers' PRSI and pension in Ireland. So what happens is you multiply the living allowance by a country coefficient, which is given in the guide for applicants. And this is, for example, 115.6% for Ireland. The mobility allowance comprises €600 per month, and a family allowance, if applicable, if you are in a partnership or recognised marriage or have dependents, you will be entitled to this amount per month. The institutional costs comprise research, training and networking costs, which should be used to finance you, the researcher, for example, to buy a laptop, to attend a conference or travel for training purposes, for example. And the management and indirect costs or overheads are given directly to the beneficiary, the institution. So again, national law will apply in terms of taxation and social security and pension. And this is information you can obtain from the NCP or the Finance Office in your future host organisation or desired beneficiary. This is the gross salary. And again, the taxation will differ depending on the country to which you wish to go. In terms of eligibility, two eligibility requirements apply to you, the researcher. Firstly, with respect to the research experience, you must have at least 4 years research experience or a PhD at the call deadline on September 9th. For those of you carrying out a PhD, you must be able to show in your CV, where you give day, month, year, to show that you have 4 years full-time research experience, and you must also complete a table. Without this, you will be deemed ineligible. For those with a PhD, it's simply no problem. You will give your graduation date in the CV. The second eligibility aspect is the mobility rule, of which there are two. Firstly, the general rule, which stipulates that you cannot apply for a fellowship in host organisation in a country where you have lived for more than 12 months in the 3 years prior to the call deadline on September 9th. The second rule is the relaxed mobility rule, where you cannot apply for a fellowship where you have lived for more than 3 years in the 5 years preceding September 9th. So again, it depends on which type of fellowship you're applying as to which mobility rule applies. If you're American and you wish to come to Europe on a standard fellowship, this rule applies. So here are the types of individual fellowships. Firstly, the European fellowships, which are again of more interest to Americans who wish to come to Europe, for example, or indeed for Europeans who wish to return. But the global fellowship is likely to be of more interest to a European who wishes to go out to a third country, such as the US or Canada, and return. So I'll go through these individually. The European fellowship, the standard fellowship, is of a maximum duration of 24 months, and the general mobility rule applies, whereby the researcher cannot have been in the country where they're applying for more than 12 months in the 3 years preceding the deadline of September 9th. A person of any nationality can apply for this fellowship. The Career Restart Fellowship, again, the applicant can be of any nationality. It has a maximum duration of 36 months. And here the researcher must have taken a career break where they've worked outside of research or been out of research for other family reasons for at least 12 months in the 18 months preceding the deadline. So this must be clear from the CV. And here the relaxed mobility rule applies, whereby the individual cannot have been in the country to which they're applying for more than 36 months in the 5 years preceding September 9th, the deadline. The reintegration fellowship is for an EU citizen or a long-term resident of 5 consecutive years who is outside the EU can return and do a fellowship there. And here the relaxed mobility rule applies, where they can't have been in the country for more than 36 months in the 5 years preceding the deadline. Please note that the Career Restart and the Reintegration Fellowships have a higher weighting, in the sense, and it's well explained in the guide for applicants, there is a higher budget awarded to those two panels, which increases the chances of success somewhat. Finally, for anyone interested in European fellowship in the non-academic sector, they can apply for the Society and Enterprise Fellowship. So you might want to go to industry, and you could always retransition back to academia afterwards, depending on what interests you. But here, the beneficiary or the host organisation must be in the non-academic sector. So it must be a company, a government department, a CSO, a charity, etc. The maximum duration is of 24 months, and the relaxed mobility rule applies, where you can't have lived in the country to which you wish to go for more than 3 years of the 5 years preceding the deadline on September 9th. So the global fellowships now have a maximum duration of 36 months. Here, the researcher who's an EU citizen or long-term resident can go out to a third country, such as the US, Canada, Singapore, etc., and they will then return to the host organisation, which is located in Europe, for 12 months. The return phase is mandatory. The general mobility rule applies, whereby this individual cannot have been in the country, in the third country, for more than 3 years of the 5 years preceding the deadline. Again, here the person can be of any nationality, standard, Career Restart, or Society and Enterprise. So if you're an American citizen, you may wish to apply to one of those. Again, this is specifically, the Society and Enterprise is specifically for beneficiaries where you want to carry out a project in the non-academic sector. If you're interested in coming to a European university or etc., you will apply probably for the standard European fellowship. Please note that the total budget awarded here for the fellowships is 328 million, of which 55 million will go to global fellowships and 10 million to the Society and Enterprise fellowships. So the majority of the budget goes towards the European fellowships. Again, for the European fellowship structure, to remind you, the experienced researcher who is a conferred PhD or 4 years full-time experience in research at the deadline applies, and the mobility rules depend on the type of fellowship for which you wish to apply. Here they must write their application with a supervisor in the European main host, which if successful will employ and host the researcher for the duration of the fellowship. However, if they wish to go on as a secondment for 3 to 6 months, they will name and give details about a co-supervisor located in a partner organisation, which could be in the non-academic sector or the other sector. This organisation must be located in Europe. And This organisation could be reimbursed by the beneficiary, because the beneficiary will be claiming the grant, and they would need to have an agreement then between them, this beneficiary and the partner organisation, if the person wishes to go on secondment. And again, a secondment must make sense for your application. It must make sense for you to achieve your career goals, and it must be detailed at all relevant aspects of the application. You will also need a co-supervisor there. The global fellowship, briefly, is again the same criteria and the mobility rule as I mentioned, whereby the individual cannot have been in the third country organisation for the outgoing phase for more than 3 years of the 5 years preceding September 9th. The European host is the beneficiary. It claims the grant and pays the researcher also during the outgoing phase to the third country partner organisation. And third countries, I remind you, include Japan, the US, Canada, Singapore, etc. And there they'll have a supervisor, of course, during this time. They'll then be reimbursed by the beneficiary during this time, and often those two organisations would sign an agreement with respect to how IP is managed, etc., from the beginning. So that's how the global fellowship works. The host organisation criteria is quite straightforward. The last one there applies to companies, where they must be able to show solvency and financial autonomy. But in terms of European organisations, certainly Irish organisations, they all have these appropriate R&D achievements, career development and infrastructure. In section 1.3, you'll show how you'll be integrated and adequately supervised, giving details about your main supervisor. You'll have a co-supervisor, perhaps in the other sector, if it makes sense, whereby you will, who has appropriate experience and supervisory experience as well. Now for the application itself, in terms of administrative parts, there are 2 separate PDFs to be uploaded on the portal, Part B1 and Part B2. Part B1 is the part that's assessed. It comprises the actual proposal, and there are 3 sections: excellence, impact and implementation. It's not just about the research. As you can see from these subheadings, it will require input from the researcher, the supervisor and the host organisations. And certainly if you choose an Irish organisation, the supervisor and the research officer there will give you the relevant information as well that you will need for the institutional environment, etc. Each subheading must be addressed in order to be successful, and do use the template and adhere to this precisely, because evaluators will mark you as to how you address each individual subheading, and if you don't, or if you leave one out, you will be given 0 for that section. And given the highly competitive nature of the fellowship, it is then very unlikely that your application will be successful. So you must adhere to the template exactly and give the information required in the section in which it is required. You will note that the excellence section is more about the quality of the research, the innovation, the societal need, how you'll carry it out, and the methodology and what you'll do in terms of research objectives and the associated work packages. The quality of the training is detailed in section 1.2 as the training you'll get, and the quality of the supervision your supervisors in the host organisation is detailed in 1.3. Finally, you must show a highly competent profile in your excellence in section 1.4. So I like to think that sometimes it's a researcher, an academic, or it could be someone, if you're applying for society and enterprise, an entrepreneur or a business person to whom you target this section in a sense. The impact section is more geared towards the impact on your future career after the fellowship and on the policy adherence of your proposal to how it strengthens the European research area, how it meets UN sustainability goals, etc. Sustainability development goals. Exploitation and dissemination, communication, public engagement. If you're coming from the US, you should read the handbook closely and get some guidance here, as they can be a little bit foreign to you in a sense. They are not like, this is not like an NIH proposal, for example. It's quite different. Here you must address policy, and I'll mention that in a subsequent slide. So here it's almost like you're addressing this to the public, the taxpayer or the policymaker, and section 3 is more about the project management, the aspect of it in terms of how it will be managed and your institutional environment. So again, you must adhere to the headings as given in the template. As I mentioned, there are 3 sections: excellence, impact and implementation, to which you're awarded a weighting of 50%, 30% and 20% respectively. Certainly the excellence section is vital, and the innovative nature and how it's going beyond the state of the art, the excellence must be very, very clear. Nonetheless, you could fall down in the other sections, so you must really address each section. The implementation section, as I mentioned, is more about the project management, and this section also includes a Gantt chart. So given this weighting, the suggested length here that we give is 5 pages for the excellence section, 2 pages for the impact section, and 3 pages for the implementation section to achieve the total required length of 10 pages. The threshold for overall score to be evaluated is 70%, but as you'll see, you'll require a significantly higher score than this in order to be funded. The criterion scoring is explained in detail on page 28 of the guide for applicants. So now part B1 and B2, as I mentioned to you, part B1 comprises the proposal which will be evaluated. Do not exceed the 10-page limit, as evaluators will disregard any excess pages, and this will render your application rather unfundable. It's too competitive. The templates can be downloaded from the Funding and the Tenders portal, and for those of you who are reapplying, the headings are the same as last year. Part B2, which is uploaded, as I mentioned, as a separate PDF file on the portal, has no page limit and is more comprises the CV of the experienced researcher, which should not exceed 5 pages, the capacity of the participating organisations, and a page for the beneficiary and a partner organisation if you're going there on secondment. Ethical aspects are addressed in Part B2.6, and ample guidance is given in the guide for applicants about this. Letters of commitment must be provided for the outgoing organisation in the third country, and these are mandatory for the global fellowships only. You don't need a letter of commitment from a partner organisation for a secondment for a standard European fellowship. It's just for the global fellowships. The scientific area is chosen and is quite clear depending on your type of research. It ranges from chemistry to life sciences to engineering and ICT. Anyone in the AHSS history across the social sciences and humanities falls under the SOC panel, a single panel, and Earth and Environmental Sciences is ENV. So you must choose one of these, but you must also choose carefully the descriptors, a minimum of 3 and a maximum of 5. The list of these descriptors can be found in Annex 4 towards the back of the guide for applicants, and please choose these with care in order to enable REA to allocate your proposal to the most appropriate experts in order to review it. This is quite important. So select those in order of importance from this list, the first being the most important and the 5 being less important, but still relevant for the proposal. I'll remind you that this fellowship is not just a research project, it's a career development project whereby you obtain training through research, in additional advanced scientific skills, we're in training in the use of a state-of-the-art equipment and new technique. But don't forget transferable skills, they're also important, and these comprise communication, IPR, entrepreneurship, leadership, job applications, etc. You will be organising and taking part in events and will have the appropriate training to do so. You will do public engagement, for example, a presentation, a YouTube video, etc. And you should also get training in gender, ethics issues, and open science. Open science is a cross-cutting issue and is quite important. It's also important to ensure that you name at least one open access journal in your dissemination section in terms of the journals where you intend to publish, and that's done in section 2.2. This is all managed by a career development plan, which you mentioned in 1.2 and in section 1.2 and maybe also 1.3. You refer to this, that it's drawn up at the beginning of the fellowship by you and your supervisors and reviewed every 6 months. You don't detail the plan in the application, you simply refer to it. We give you ample advice about how to do this in the handbook, whereby you should incorporate the 3 I's in your proposal where relevant. And the 3 I's are, of course, international. You will be exhibiting mobility as part of your parcours and in changing country. The intersectoral element, if you go on a secondment to the other sector or a short visit to an organisation in the other sector, for example. And interdisciplinarity. In section 1, you should detail how your research goes beyond your specific domain and how it incorporates another domain, and in the training also if necessary. So the interdisciplinarity is important to highlight if applicable to your proposal. as I mentioned previously, you should also address cross-cutting themes in your research and in your training, such as RRI, gender, and open science, for example. What distinguishes the MSCA individual fellowship from other fellowships with which you may be more familiar is the fact that you must incorporate policy in the proposal. And relevant policy includes, for example, this is an Irish policy, but rather the European Code of Conduct for Research Integrity. You will be adhering with the ethics procedures you've mentioned in the methodology, also in the training, for example, and in the impact, if applicable. Certainly, you're strengthening the European research area and highlighting the UN Sustainable Development Goals, which your project addresses can be done in section 1.1 and in section 2.1 in the impact. For example, if you're doing research in the area of life sciences, you will be referring there to UN Sustainability Development Goal number 3, good health and well-being. So again, your proposal will be highly individualized and tailored to your type of research. As I mentioned, open science and open access is also relevant here. The evaluation process is detailed very well in the proposal, and I'll only go through it quickly here. Initially, research staff will ensure that your proposal is eligible. Those that do will be assigned 3 evaluators. And again, this evaluation is done entirely online by 3 evaluators individually, and then during a consensus phase, the operation of it is overseen by a chair, and at the end they'll determine a ranking, a score which shows where you are in the ranking. But remember, it's only the top ranked proposals that will be funded, and that until the budget runs out. In early February next year, you will receive results in the form of an evaluation summary report where you receive a score for each of the 3 sections: excellence, impact, and implementation. This score will be out of 5, as I mentioned. So here are the success rates for last year's call for the different types of panel, the standard for the Irish success rate and the European average success rate. So the career restart, where you've taken a break out of research and you come back, the reintegration panel, and the society and enterprise, which you can see was certainly the success rate was higher last year than the other panels. This is because the threshold or the score necessary to be successful is also considerably lower, which I'll show you in the next table. The global fellowship, again, quite a high success rate, this outgoing phase to a third country and the return phase to a European beneficiary. So this is the total overall success rate for Ireland and the EU average. Please note also that resubmissions have a considerably higher success rate. So if you're eligible, do consider resubmitting as you learn with each experience. And certainly I would advise that you compare 22% here to 15%. And global fellowships are often for rising stars and future faculty who might want to leave Europe and then return to Europe if they have perspectives to become a faculty member there. Here are the cut-off scores for funding for each of the panels under the European and the Global Fellowship. So from chemistry down to maths, physics, and AHSS SOC. So you can see that they're always over 90% with a few exceptions for the European and the Global Fellowships. That's the career restart. But the Society and Enterprise Fellowship has, as I mentioned, with 82.2%, a threshold or a score necessary to, the lowest score necessary to be funded is 82.2%. It's considerably lower there. So if you're considering a fellowship in the non-academic sector, that might be something to keep in mind. This means that you essentially need a score of 4.6 to 4.7 out of 5 for each 3 sections: excellence, impact, and implementation. You really need to be aiming for that. So do right now, hone it, get input, get the review from your research officer in your future host organisation or desired host organisation, and from the NCP if that support service is done. It is done for Irish organisations. I give a review for the top applications which are sent to me from research organisations around the country. And that does vastly improve and increase their success rate. That has been the experience. But again, this is highly competitive, it's highly prestigious, it must be honed, and get input from an expert. Ask a person who was successful that you know for a copy of their proposal. This, of course, can't be released by your national contact point due to obvious IP and confidentiality issues, but it's a way to get an overview of a previously successful proposal. And this is, of course, done on an individual basis, or perhaps within an organisation there are applications which can be shared, but that cannot be sent to you by me, certainly, due to IP issues. So here's the applicant profile. You've seen the success rates, you've seen the scores. Here's the profile of the applicants in terms of their years post-PhD, where you see that both the majority of the applicants in the outer circle and the awardees in the inner circle are 0 to 3 or 4 to 6 years post-PhD. So they're all quite junior. Those with a PhD in progress, the success rate is a little lower, but it's there. And remember that you are compared with your peers. So if you're excellent for your career stage, you will be compared with those at the exact same career stage as you. In that respect, it's quite fair. You will also notice that the success rate decreases the more senior and more years post-PhD the applicants have. So the average success rate again was 15% across the board, as I saw in my as I showed you in my previous table. This skills audit is something I highly recommend that you do if you're going to apply with your supervisor. List the skills you have now, not just the specific technical skills, but the transferable skills that you also have or are competent in or have received training in. Where do you want to go and what skills do you need in that position? And then list the skills that you'd like to have training in and acquire during your research fellowship. Also remember that there's a bidirectional knowledge transfer from your supervisor and host and team and institution around you, but also vice versa. This is why it can be very useful to discuss this with your future supervisor, and it can be a very useful exercise to allow you to develop your section 1.2 and consider your career development plan. Here are some tips on this slide. I advise you strongly to use our handbook, which is on the Net for Mobility Plus and IUA website, which gives you step-by-step advice for each section of the application. Some tips apart from that are to show how you're innovating. How is this innovative? How is it novel and going beyond the state of the art? You must very clearly articulate this in section 1. Given that you cannot exceed 10 pages and that all your evaluation will be done perhaps by one non-expert and others whose native tongue is not English, on an online portal, you must really have a clear, concise writing style and that there's no ambiguity in what you want to achieve. Apologies, the slide went back. You must address topical issues and policy. If your topic is highly relevant, society relevant not right now, you should stipulate that on page 1, what UNSGG you address, and again in the impact. In section 1.4, you must sell yourself and show a well-rounded profile, not simply showcasing the academic accolades such as publications, patents, prizes and awards, but also leadership, organizational skills, committees, events you've organised, students you've mentored, etc. So do exhibit a well-rounded profile here, and the evaluators will check your CV for these highlights that you elucidate, you place emphasis on in section 1.4. Section 2.1 is about the impact on your career more broadly after the fellowship. Communication, section 2.2 and indeed 2.3 provide details and use both face-to-face and electronic social media, etc. You can use social media to communicate your activities from the beginning of the project and also disseminate, talk about your achievements, your results, your publications on Twitter. Twitter is more and more widely used by academics nowadays and can increase your impact and increase your network as well. Do include metrics in dissemination and communications because this is the impact section. Remember that you want to show how you are impacting your field. For example, if you are going to present at the top conference in the field and there will be 10,000 attendees, you should show that so that an evaluator has a clear view of the high impact of your work. Common errors to avoid is that the methodology in section 1 is frequently too short. You can link your methodology with outcomes and deliverables. This adds to coherency because you'll have deliverables and milestones for your research work packages in the Gantt chart in section 3. Section 1.2 have clear in terms of the research skills and the transferable skills, but also show the bi-directional knowledge transfer, not just in one direction from the host organization, supervisor and team to you, but also vice versa. Do include details about the surrounding team and any networking opportunities in 1.3. Do not focus purely on academic achievements in 1.4. Show a well-rounded profile. Dissemination and communication are often confused. I remind you that dissemination is disseminated to experts in your field, such as other researchers and perhaps policymakers, about your results. Communication, on the other hand, is about your activities, which can commence from the beginning of the project and is to the non-expert, society, school children, etc. The risks are often too generic in section 3. Do include one for each research work package, as well as a realistic mitigation plan. The secondment is often not fully developed. It's too briefly mentioned. It should be detailed throughout the application where relevant. You will receive the PDF of this presentation from Howard after the webinar, which I would ask you not to disseminate further or to reuse, but you can click on these links which show you examples of the previously funded IF projects coming to Irish beneficiaries in the different panels: life sciences, physics, AHSS, the reintegration panel, which allowed an Australian, for example, an Irish person to return from Australia, and society and enterprise, where a foreign national went to work in a company. Again, these give you an idea of them, but you can also find more on the Project and Results Service, which can also enable you to some extent to assess the novelty of your proposal. The resources that I mentioned include, of course, the handbook, which gives you detailed section-by-section advice about how to write the application, how to incorporate relevant policy, and also how to avoid certain common mistakes, and to include certain strengths which characterize successful proposals. Strengths and weaknesses for each section are provided in this handbook, which can be downloaded from either the Net for Mobility Plus or the Irish Universities Association website. On the IUA website, you'll find a recorded webinar, which gives you far more detail on how to prepare an application. This is a YouTube video recording, which can be accessed by everyone as well. As I mentioned previously, Ireland did very well in the IF call last year, with our highest drawdown since the beginning of the framework programme in 2014. So we welcome high quality applicants. There is a great deal of research being carried out, very high quality and high impact research being carried out around the country. So on this slide, you can click on a link which will bring you to the profiles for the 7 IUA universities. And the RCSI, the Royal College of Surgeons of Ireland, is not included there, but they also carry out a great deal of high quality research in the life sciences and are very successful in IF applications. The SFI centres are top-notch centres where research in STEM, from material science to IT to data analytics, etc., is being carried out around the country. And finally, the third link will bring you to the IoTs, which often carry out more applied research and have a regional remit. And also Technological University Dublin is another university where you can apply to carry out a research and training project. If you are interested in applying to come to Ireland or any other country, what you should do now is identify a supervisor. You'll often be aware of the top supervisors in your domain by quickly sending them your CV and project synopsis. And then if they agree, they will put you in touch with the research officers in the organisation. At all Irish organisations, they're highly competent research officers who will provide you with further information that you certainly will need for your application for the Section 3 and Part B2. So I'd advise you to commence that if you haven't done so without delay. Now here's the proposal writing timeline. Proposal writing is ongoing, and I advise you to submit prior to the September 9th deadline, preferably the day previously, as you may encounter technical difficulties due to the high volume of applications being uploaded on September 9th. Please note it's 5 p.m. CET, 4 p.m. Irish time, so do respect this, as after 5 p.m. that day, you will no longer be able to upload your application. As stipulated in the guide for applicants, it is highly advisable to start your application early with the PIC number of your future beneficiary, with the various details. You save it, and it's the final saved version that's submitted that will be evaluated. So do start this process early. As I previously mentioned, you will obtain the results in early February next year, and the earliest starting date thereafter is agreed with the project officer at REA, with whom you will liaise for all post-award issues. Please note that you may wish to defer your starting date. This may be to the fact COVID, it may be personal circumstances, it may be because you consider your CV more competitive this year than potentially next year, or you're really competitive now for your career stage at this point in time. Or you may have a fellowship with a longer duration where you have funding and you wish to start after it has ended. The latest starting date, if you are successful in this call, is September 1st, 2022. Thank you very much for your attention. We have, if you're coming to an Irish organisation, I advise you to get in touch with your supervisor, who will get in touch with the research officer there. But in Ireland, we do have a LinkedIn group. The website is here, and we also have a Twitter group, a Twitter account, which you can follow if you wish. Certainly, I again refer you to the research officers in the organisations to which you're going and the resources which I showed you on the previous slide. Should you have questions about your eligibility, you must address those to the NCP in the country to which you wish to go. And thank you again for your attention now. So now I'll begin to look at the questions, if there are any. And in the chat, I don't see any right now. If you'd like to tell me, Howard, if there are questions here, has anyone asked any questions?
So first and foremost, thank you very much for the great comprehensive presentation. We will be following up to all the attendees with an email with all of the social media links and other information that's been presented today. Dr. Canny, you'll see a different section as a presenter under the questions tab on your window. I've assigned a few questions to you, so there should be about 5 or 6 right now. And let me know if you don't see those. I can read those off to you.
I see those, thank you. So the first one from Claudia. Remember that your application must be feasible. So if you wish to go to the outgoing stage, they're not restricted, but you should be aware that you can, if you're there, you're going to a European beneficiary. Your European beneficiary, if you're successful, signs the grant agreement, right? So what you can do is you can have 3 months there, 21 months in the third country, and you must return to Europe for the mandatory return phase. You can have a secondment, but in order to ensure feasibility, I would be inclined to not have more than 1. Remember, you also have what they deem a secondment in terms of the outgoing phase. I believe that people have secondments sometimes, but they must be feasible and they must be of use. You already must justify what you're doing during all phases, and again you have to write the application in the same 10 pages. So remember that the global fellowship is a little bit more complicated to write in the sense that you must include everything, the research, the training, the dissemination and communication activities for both phases in the same 10-page volume, so to speak, and so please ensure that this is feasible. Do you apply to either the RI or the subject panel? Yeah, you basically, you put it both in when you do that. You'll do that on the portal, yes. There are no interviews in the selection process, no. It's all done online. It's evaluated purely on the paper they see in front of them, maybe on a screen. So that's why it has to be well written, clear, and also well structured and presented. The handbook provides you with ample advice about that. No, this doesn't affect the success of the application. Of course, they look at the supervisor's profile to ensure they have the adequate profile. It's up to you to show that you're going to a good institution in the sense that you're showing that the project is novel, that it's excellent, that you as an applicant are excellent for your career stage with a well-rounded profile, and that the institution to which you're going for the fellowship is the best possible place for you to go. I'm simply stating that applications to Irish institutions are also most welcome. The next question, you can submit earlier, you won't benefit from draft reviews, and depending on who you ask to review them, you can certainly benefit from draft reviews by your supervisor, certainly with whom it's advised to write the application and who should certainly write it with you. So I would say rather do benefit from the reviews which you can get. No, in the case of a resubmission, the evaluators only know that it's a resubmission at the last minute and after they have assigned scores to your application. They only know that at the very end phase. They will therefore it cannot bias them one way or the other. You should also avoid any references within the proposal or within the application to the fact that it's a resubmission in the 10 pages. You should also avoid any references to a seal of excellence if you obtained one from the first submission. The ethical part, you must complete it. You must complete a table. If you identify ethics issues, you must write that, and you must get information about that from the research officer or your supervisor in the host organisation to which you're going. You must show that in the application, mention in the methodology as well, that you're complying with all national and European relevant ethics procedures with the GDPR data transfer, etc. And of course, if you're working with patients, you'll naturally state that informed consent will have been obtained prior to carrying out the research. It's important to mention that in the actual proposal, but certainly you can get more information from the research officer and from your supervisor, depending on the type of research in question. I don't see any more questions there.
So I'll give a quick moment for any last minute questions individuals might have. I'm getting a lot of thank you messages addressed to you, but I won't assign those to you. So thank you everyone for the enthusiastic questions. I'll briefly
You're most welcome. I hope this was helpful to you all.
Thank you. I'll briefly summarize that we will be publishing this webinar recording on our website and YouTube channel for you to view again. As Dr. Canny mentioned, the presentation PDF will be shared with you after this presentation. However, please do not distribute it further. If you have additional questions regarding MSCA, please do reach out to the corresponding national contact point in the country of the host institution, as she mentioned. And then I'll supplement this. I believe you may have mentioned this very briefly, but Dr. Canny wrote an excellent individual fellowship applicants handbook for 2020 that serves as an unofficial but very useful source. I linked to this in the webinar reminder emails that were automatically generated yesterday and an hour before the start of this webinar. We will resend it, but it's an excellent resource for any applicants. And then finally, please do, I will be sending a link to the EURAXESS North America website so everyone can learn more about additional funding opportunities and job opportunities throughout Europe. I don't see any more questions. Again, thank you everyone for the kind messages you're sending to Dr. Canny. I'll leave the floor to you for any last words, but again, thank you so much.
Well, thank you again. I hope it was helpful. Do remember and recall that this fellowship, if you're a US citizen who wishes to come abroad and with impending Brexit, etc., consider your country where you're going to go with all the opportunities. Do get advice and feedback from the supervisor. To me, this is quite vital. And if you are using our handbook, certainly it does give useful information. It must be used in conjunction with the guide for applicants. Do adhere to all the headings. And do write this with a view to advancing your research career. How are you advancing to the next step? And please don't forget the transferable skills as well. Not just the research skills, but also the transferable skills, which will render you highly employable, indeed, in any sector, in both the academic and the non-academic sectors. So again, if you have other eligibility queries and you're going to another European country, please do not contact me, but rather the national contact point for that country where the desired beneficiary or host organisation is located. So thank you again for your attention and wishing you all the very best of luck with your application.
Thank you all so much. Take care.